Much of the time up to now, I've decided on the subject of my video, the daily summation, the day before and sometimes even the day of the day for which it's made. Recently, I found a bunch of things I decided I needed to be talked about well in advance of when I felt able to do so, and this video and podcast is one such time. I usually have some idea what caused a given idea to come to me. For this one, I have to admit I don't recall exactly what it was. Hello and welcome to the Daily Summation from Kurt's Religion and Politics. I'm your host. I'm Kurt. Today is Saturday, the 23rd of January of 2021. The subject of today's video and podcast is race is not an excuse. I want to start out by saying something that kind of will lay a groundwork. Well, okay. Before I even get into that, let me do this. I'm not saying that differences in how people behave are always bad and should always be looked at as such. I'm not saying differences in how people dress, how they comport themselves, and so forth always have to match perfectly one with another. That's not what I'm saying. So let's get that out front. Okay, let's get that out front. Now, I have a moderately autistic, that is level 2 autistic son. Okay, he's probably a little closer to level 3 than he is to level 1. That is to say, he's probably a little bit more autistic to the point where he's not severe or level 3, but he's moving in that direction. He's certainly not towards the mild side, though it's harder to tell that these days than it has been in the past. I have to admit, I was concerned that he would never be able to fit into society at large, and at age 8, that nagging thought still lingers in my mind to this day. He may end up being just fine. Then again, maybe not. As time goes on, though, I've pushed to get him to behave in ways that were more acceptable to society at large. The point is that his autism shouldn't be an excuse. If that's true for somebody who's autistic, and particularly for somebody who's more autistic, how much more should it be true for example, racial differences? There are differences in culture. There are differences in the way people behave that are based on culture. And here's the interesting thing. There are different cultures even within countries. So, for example, within the United States. And in fact, you can go to other countries where that's even more true. So if you go to places like India, the potential cultures that you might confront or be confronted with are the variety is huge. It's a huge variety of potential cultures, right? But here in the United States even, there are definitely very different cultures. And I'm not averse to, against, or really I don't have any problem with the idea that that's true. But the reality is this. You must be able to live within the overall culture of your society if you expect to be successful in that society. If you're using race as an excuse for your not meeting the standards and norms of that society, unless you can honestly say that that society is setting norms that are specifically targeting your race, I'm sorry, but you're doing something that's improper, inappropriate, and so forth. And you need to know that. I have to live within the norms of society. I don't necessarily always agree with what society says I have to do, and sometimes I won't do what they tell me to. But here's the thing. I recognize, race aside, that it's my job to either fit into the society or potentially suffer the consequences. And that's true for you as much as it is for anybody. I don't care what your race is. I don't care if you're, quote, black or, quote, white, which I think are stupid, by the way. Black and white, what a rubbish concept in my mind. But that said, I don't care if you're those, or if you're Native American, or if you're Asian, or if you're Indian. Well, technically that's Asian too, right? So Korean, Chinese, Vietnamese, Laotian, whatever, right? I don't care if you're European. I don't care if you're then German, French, British, whatever. I don't care. When you're here in the United States, there are a set of expectations that are in place in this country to which you must work to attain compliance, if you will. Now, let's be honest. There are things that are more important and things that are less important. Do you wear dreadlocks? I don't really care. You might find that there are some people who do, but I don't. Do you speak in a way that makes it difficult for others to understand you? I do care a little bit about that because your ability to communicate matters. When you choose, okay, so I lived in Hawaii for a while. I, in fact, graduated high school at Waiakea High School in Hilo, Hawaii, okay? And the Hawaiian folks, when they spoke to one another, they spoke in what is typically referred to as pidgin. It was a mix of Hawaiian and English, and the English was sometimes things that you wouldn't, necessarily recognize as English. But they knew when they went to school or whatever, and they were talking to teachers, what have you, or how the students like me, white boy students like me, that if they didn't speak in a language that we understood, we weren't going to communicate. And I tried to learn sufficient amounts of the pidgin, if you will, to be able to communicate with them on their terms. But the point I'm making here is there was a need for them to communicate, so they modified their ways of doing business so that they were able to do so, much to their credit, by the way, because of course this was Hawaii. Just like I said when I was in Korea, when an American serviceman turned and looked at a Korean guy who was talking to another Korean guy, and when we were walking down a bay of a warehouse, and said to him, "Speak English," I thought to myself, dude, you're in Korea. You're in Korea, right? And so the expectation is, if anything, that I should be working to deal with Korean rather than the Korean person working to deal with English. But more importantly, the Korean people were actually pretty good about learning English enough to get along so that they could work on that military installation. And I grant you, they made pretty good money there by comparison to the local economy, but that's beside the point. The point is, when people come to the United States, just the same as when you go to any foreign country, the expectation should be for you to meet the societal norms of the society in question in as much as you're willing and able to do so. If you're an outsider coming into that society, that's one thing, right? Koreans expected Americans to be unpeopled, to be people who couldn't even be expected to act in civilized and proper manners according to the Korean way of looking at life. So as an American who was a visitor to the Republic of Korea, I didn't have the same expectations on me. And as a Mexican in the United States who's actually visiting, I don't think you should either. If you live here, though, if you spend extended periods of time here, I think you should make an effort to make it possible for you to deal with people in a sort of a more native, more reasonable way. So the longer you're in a given place, the more I think you should try to meet the expectations. Now, again, when you're dealing with friends and so forth who deal with the world in the same way you do, say you're black and your friends all speak in a certain way and all dress in certain ways and so forth. When you're dealing with those people, what do I care if you deal with them, in the same way that they would deal with you? I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. And to some degree, I don't mind that sort of thing when I'm dealing with you either. If we can work together, I don't really care. But the point is, race should not be an excuse for much of anything. Maybe a, quote, excuse to get certain diseases because certain racial groups may be more prone to things. Like I said, I think it's Epstein-Barr virus or whatever it is that the Jews are more prone to, and sickle cell anemia that black folks tend to be more prone to, hypertension as well, maybe. And I don't know what Euros are more prone to, but I promise you there are probably a bunch of things I just don't really pay attention very much, so I don't really know, right? But the point is, those things are a result of their cultural heritage. But the point is, don't make race an excuse. Don't make it an excuse. It's not an excuse for anything. And that doesn't mean, like I say, you can't behave in ways that you think are appropriate and acceptable, but that maybe aren't, quote, normal. It just means that you don't make it an excuse. So when you deal with people, you deal with them in such a way that you work together with them and they work together with you. All right, I'm about out of time for this video. As I say, I can't really remember exactly what brought this video on to begin with. So I'm not quite sure what happened there, but I'm going to go ahead and leave it at that. Again, don't make your race white, black, whatever. Don't make it an excuse. It's not an excuse. Learn to deal with other people. Learn to deal with people as much as you can where they live, regardless who they are. And that's true for me as a, quote, white person as much as anybody. All right, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this video now. As I've said, today is the 23rd of January of 2021, and it is Saturday. I'm glad to have you along this morning, whether it's on YouTube, on Rumble, on the podcast, whichever it happens to be. I'm glad to have you visit, and hopefully you're having a good day. Hopefully your weekend is starting out well, and hopefully we will see you again tomorrow. The speaker on this edition of the Daily Summation is Kurt Schubert. This video was recorded on Saturday, the 23rd of January of 2021. The Daily Summation is created for Kurt's Religion and Politics. Thanks for watching this edition of the Daily Summation from Kurt's Religion and Politics. I hope you found it entertaining or instructional, or maybe both. If you want to see more from me, you can go to blogs.kpschubert.com. That's blogs.kpschubert.com. I am on Twitter, Parler, and Minds.com. My handle on each of those is @kpschubert. That's @kpschubert. I have a Rumble and a YouTube channel. They are the Kurt's Religion and Politics channels on Rumble and YouTube. I have a Facebook page. The Facebook page is Kurt's Religion and Politics as well. I am on Patreon. If you want to support me, that's one of the better places you can do that. And you will find me at Kurt's Religion and Politics on Patreon. I have a podcast. The podcast is podcasts with an S, .kpschubert.com. That's podcasts.kpschubert.com. I think you should be able to find me with relative ease on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify as well. The best way I find to do that is to look for Kurt's Religion and Politics. You can try to use the Daily Summation. I find that it doesn't work as well as a general rule, but you can always try that. I'm glad to have you aboard today, and hopefully we will see you again tomorrow.